Hello, this Excel tip is going to cover some more complex if statements. So let's start with how this sheet is set up. First off, it has number 1, number 2, and number 3. So we're going to be comparing 15, 44, and the number 10 right now. And of course, we can change this throughout the process. So we're going to just answer 3 different logic questions here with some if statements. The first logic question is number 1 less than number 2? The second logic question is number 3 greater than number 1 and number 2 individually? So that just means is number 3 the greatest of all those two? And the third logic question is going to be, is number 1 between number 2 and number 3? So these are some logic questions that if statements in Excel will help us answer. So let's look at the first logic example. Is number 1 less than number 2? So this one we've done sort of before, so I'm going to go rather quickly through this. But this is the formula. If A5 is less than B5, so there's the logic right there, because number 1 is A5 and number 2 is B5. If this is true, it's going to return the phrase number 1 is less than number 2. And if this is false, number 1 is not less than number 2. So we can see when we evaluate it, so this is the evaluation of that formula. When we evaluate it, does return number 1 is less than number 2. So this is sort of the obvious way to do this one, but let me give you another way, and this is sort of a common mistake, and that's why I want to go over it. We can also do, even though it's not the question, we can do if A5 is greater than B5. So if A5 is greater than B5, we know we just basically then, this is the opposite of this one. So then we just say, okay, in this case, now we switch up the value of true and the value of false. So in this case, if this is true, number 1 is not less than number 2. And if this is false, number 1 is less than number 2. So just think about that for a second. Look at how this one is different than this one. And think about why it's different. Both of them will give the same result no matter what we do. Even if we make this 50, it's going to give us the same result there. But they're crafted in different ways, and that's the idea behind this. So now let's move to this one. This one's a little bit more complicated. Is number 3 greater than number 1 and number 2 individually? So all that means is number 3 greater than those. Now you may think that you can type, C5 greater than B5 greater than A5, but that will not work. So be careful. You can't cascade greater than signs. So let me show you how this one works. So let's just look at the formula up here. It's a little easier to see up here. So the first thing we do is if C5 is greater than B5. So then what we do is we say if this is true, we have another if statement. And if it's false, we go ahead and just say, because if C5 is not greater than B5, then we know number 3 is not greater than number 2, so we know number 3 is not greater than number 1 and number 2 individually. Okay, so right away, if this one's false, we just jump right to here. But if this is true, we still have to show what if we have to figure out if C5 is greater than A5, and that's why we have another if statement inside. This is called a nested if statement. And here's our second if statement inside the first one. So if this is true, then we have to check whether C5 is greater than A5. So here we go ahead and do that, and we see that if this is true, then number 3 is greater than number 1 and number 2 individually, and if it's false, then number 3 is not greater than number 1 and number 2 individually. So this is one way to do it. And the other thing what's nice about this is you can sort of check your answers by going to, we click this form and going to formulas up top and going to evaluate formula. Now what this is going to do for you is it's going to evaluate this. Here's our formula, and it's going to evaluate each step of the process. So it's going to evaluate what C5 is. It's going to evaluate what B5 is. And then it's going to say this is false. So then it's going to jump in and show you what's going on there. Okay? So this is a good way to check some of your formulas if you're not sure what's going on. And then you can even restart and do it again. So let's look at the next way to do this is number 3 greater than number 1 and number 2 individually. And this one's a little bit easier to understand. So let's look up here. Now we're checking them both at the same time. We're checking and. So in this case, the only way this and will be true is if C5 is greater than B5 and C5 is greater than A5. And this is a little bit easier way to do it because then we only have one true statement and one false statement. So that's another way to do it. Another sort of weird way to do it is using an or statement. So in this case, the or statement, if C5 is less than B5 or C5 is less than A5, we know that number 3 is not greater than number 1 or number 2 individually. So it's just another sort of way to do it. So you can see there's lots of different ways. And again, you want to take your time and go through this sheet and see and make sure you understand all of these things. Now, let's go to the last one. And this question is number 1 between number 2 and number 3? So it's just asking, is this first number in between? In this case it is, because 15 is in between 44 and 10. So let's look at the formula. So this is sort of a mess. So the first thing we have to check is if C5 is greater than B5. So if it is, then that means that we know that in this case, this one is higher than that one. So then we go into this and statement. Now we know to be in between, that means A5 has to be less than C5 and A5 has to be greater than B5. If the other case, so that then we go to this sort of statement here. So then we're basically checking whether they're in between. The other case, this and statement, means that C5 is less than B5. So that means it's the other way around. And you can sort of see this greater than switched from a less than here. And this less than switched from a greater than here. So the idea is that if we switch 44 and 10 here, this if statement is still going to work. This is probably one of the hardest if statements you'll see in this class, if not the hardest. But it's really important to go through and really understand what's going on here. So the idea is that this if statement is going to work either way. And what I would recommend is that you try to write this on your own to try to figure out what is going on here. And if you need some help, look back at this for a hint. So there's actually a bunch of other different ways that we could write this if statement, but I'm going to leave that to you as an exercise. Thanks for watching this Excel tip.